Awaken. To rouse from sleeping, to stir to life. To wake from slumber, to bring back to consciousness. Awake, my soul, wake up, O sleeper. Rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Let us not be like others who are asleep, but let us be awake. Awake, awake, rise up, Jerusalem. Awake, awake, Zion, clothe yourself with strength. Awake, north wind, and blow. Awake, harp and lyre, awaken the dawn. Awake as in days gone by, as in days of old. For when they became fully awake, they saw his glory.
So, Pastor Pepe said this is not a Q&A. However, in a sense it is, because I'm going to ask some questions and we're going to hear some answers. It's just not a Q&A in that there's no open mic somewhere for the Dwight Schrutes in the room to try to figure out a better system for. So, how many people in the room would say you are an expert eavesdropper? Okay. Wow, that's an odd thing to be so proud of. Unbelievable. Have you ever found yourself in a setting where, whether it's like a coffee shop or maybe public transit or somewhere where you're like, I am in this and I'm deeply committed to how this conversation goes, even though it's not my conversation?
Like you stay on one stop past your stop just to see how it wraps up?
You're like, yeah, I could always just loop back around. I'll do a U-turn. You just want to see how it resolves. Have you ever been like in a setting where you're like, I'm trying to figure out, is this a first date? Or maybe a last date, maybe both? And it's especially helpful when people are loud talkers. Yesterday on the ferry, I could hear behind me what was for sure a Zoom interview. Like someone very loud, very assertive in what was totally a one-way conversation, only to find out halfway through the trip along the way that it was a two-sided interview. They were just a really loud talker talking to a really quiet talker. So they were interviewing intently with questions, and I just couldn't hear the answers, so I assumed there's no one there, but there was just a quiet talker responding. And the reason I couldn't hear, because there was a lady in front of me who sang full volume the entire trip. And she talked to herself in between songs and tried to like coax herself into the next playlist. And she, at one point, she's like, should we do some Mandarin? Yeah, let's do some Mandarin. And then she started singing in Mandarin, and there was a Chinese guy in the same little sector who kept looking over his shoulder. I'm not sure how her accent was. It was definitely not her first language. I love eavesdropping, is I guess what I'm trying to get to. And so what we thought today is we would set up an environment where essentially you get to just listen in on a conversation. It may be interesting, it may get dull, but stick with it. You have no idea where it might end up. Does that sound okay? Awesome. Well, it's an honor to sit here. Don't need to introduce the panelists. You've heard from them. You have already checked them out. You know online what they do, the things they're passionate about. But one of the questions each of them would receive with frequency is like, how did you get here? Not meaning physically this location, but how did you, what's been the process whereby you figured out your call and you're here doing the thing you are doing now. So as a launching off point, we're going to start there and we'll just keep the conversation going. Guys, how'd you get here?
What does that mean? How did I get here?
Exactly.
Alaska Airlines?
Well, not physically. At the end of a session, I heard it asked a few times yesterday, like, oh, but how did you figure out like how to be here? Like figure out what you're good at, figure out what you're called to do. How are you in this process of like doing the thing you're doing and passionate about it? So how'd you get here?
I'm still figuring out what I like, what I don't like, what I'm into, what works, what doesn't work. I don't really have much of a game plan. I'm probably not like maybe some other people that would be like, they know what they wanted to do their whole life, and this is my singular calling. God told me, he spoke to me in a dream, and prophets confirmed it. And I saw him literally write it on a wall, and it was in my cereal. I was eating alphabet, like I honestly, it has been trial and error. It has been happenstance. I kind of wanted to be a musician. I still dress for the job that I want. I am a failed artist. I love Jesus. I love the church. I have these guiding principles in my life that I've always tried to, live by and build. I think that building the kingdom of God is like, it's an honor to do it in any capacity. So if I wasn't doing ministry or whatever, that I would still be part of a local church and serving and building whatever. I saw a need. I built something that filled a need, and I want to continue to do things that help people. And so, but beyond that, I don't know what all that looks like, And I'm trying new things at the moment, some really scary things, some things that I'm really excited about. They might fail, but I'm used to that now. I resent failures and I'm scared of failures, but I'm sort of getting used to the idea that like life is not this continuous upwards helix. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here, and I'm just trying to work out my salvation with fear and trembling and discover the gifts that God has given me, and I don't know which ones are good, and I don't necessarily have all the strategies, and I'm learning, and I'm continuing my education in public in front of people, which is really scary as well, so that's how I got here.
I find myself almost never being able to say, like, God led me here or is leading me or God told me forward looking, but retrospectively I'm able to go, oh, I can see that the Lord had me in a very particular place. Right. And I think really that good. Sometimes we tell stories using the past, which is how usually stories about yourself happened. And the way we summarize them sometimes actually mislead what it feels like to be on that story. And so what I've noticed when we talk about how do we get here or following God's will and purposes, what the speaker's saying and what the listener's hearing, there's a dissonance between it. Like, for example, I could say to you, God, like my wife, Rachel, like I believe with my whole heart, like God orchestrated that whole thing. Deciding to marry Rachel felt like faith and risk and a decision. It felt like a decision that my friends were involved with based off of God's word, but I ended up covenanting to her without a word in my cereal. But in retrospect, I can see how God orchestrated these things, and I can look back and go, that's the purposes of God. So it's really interesting. It's like, how did I get here is really here in the whatever sense the word we're talking about is like, it has been doing my best to steward what's ever in front of me and to move through life with friends that have shaped me. And like trying to honor God and not always feeling like, and then seeing that how he like takes my best and sometimes worst efforts at that and like fulfills his purposes. And I don't mean that in the high sovereignty, like, but I just mean he's just so much more generous than I thought. And so I just see I could have never orchestrated this, and I feel like I'm following God. I feel like God meant that I'd marry Rachel, meant that I would plant the Way Church in Vancouver. But a lot of it felt like journeying with friends, giving something a go. So it's a very unique thing to talk about. I appreciate the opportunity to verbally process in front of everybody.
These are great thoughts by both of these individuals. I think the most difficult part about this question is narrowing what I have to say about this. Some of the best advice I ever got is that life is about problem solving, but not solving every problem. Finding out the problem that you believe you're interested in solving and putting your hand toward that. And I think that's best served by interests. I think if I look at where I'm at right now, it's a combination of decision making, trying to honor God, trying to keep my commitments to God, trying to honor my strengths, trying to serve my commitments and the convictions that I have, being okay with failing, being strong in times of failure and failing well, and taking the wisdom of the people that are closest to me and doing everything that I sense within me I should do with all my heart. And I think it's a combination of that. But I like what Jason's saying is that a lot of times we try to look at the past and sum up and say, well, this is what was going on, or what was going on, and we think we know how we succeeded. And most of the time, I think we stumble upon our successes. Right. We kind of fall into those successes. What I would just leave you with this is maybe the best advice I learned is if you don't have your heart in something, don't continue to do it. I think some of the biggest wastes of time I've had in my life in things that I shouldn't be in were immediately clear to me as soon as I realized that my heart wasn't involved in these things. I think sometimes the leadership of the Holy Spirit is in the things that our heart is involved in. And so I wish I would have, if I could go back and change things, kind of pulled out of things that my heart wasn't in and put them towards things that my heart is in, because when I went after the things that I really had a heart for, that's when I began to find opportunity, success, despite the risk it took to pursue those things. And the courage. I remember I had a big decision to make, and a friend told me, the only thing that you lack is courage. It takes courage to follow your heart. I think when we get the courage to follow our heart, we get on the path of the success, and maybe, if I can be so, assuming to say the path that God has for us. It takes courage to follow God.
Right.
Yeah. Bunch of random thoughts. Hope you can do something with them.
Great. So as you guys talk about looking backwards, that retrospective picture where you can see the hand of God working, and then also talk about failures. How do you guys process retroactively your failures? When you look back, maybe you could speak to one where you're like, that didn't go as I thought it would, and here's what I got from that. Because it's one thing to say, we look back and, God was good. Look at all the blessings. But what about, how do you process those failures?
I just shove them deep, deep down. And like a little thought comes and just drown it out with doom scrolling and political commentary. I struggle with, what's interesting? I feel like there's blocks of my life that there's failure that I can process and accept. But there's some from certain really vulnerable stages of my life where I haven't figured out how to navigate through them. And I think I'm realizing they play a louder voice in my life than I'd like to admit. Like getting involved with ministry early on, like you mentioned, learning in front of people. I think my biggest shame that I'm trying to process is things I said in public, the way I reacted to something, the way my passion took over me. And it was in a very real way, I almost want to say to a younger version of myself, you're doing the best you could. Yeah. But there's a lot of areas of my life I can extend a lot of grace on failures, but there's just a few moments that I've just been really curious. And what I'm curious about is maybe that's something to work out with a counselor. It's true. But also what that might reveal about my deepest longings or deepest fears, what it might reveal about what God's trying to speak to me. The thing that has helped me the most, though, is being around friends who aren't afraid of failing. One of the worst things that got into the church, I believe, is not just comparison, but anytime someone gives something a go, it's kind of I'm only going to back you if it's successful. And I really feel we should be behind each other giving things a go. I met somebody today that's I'm starting a coffee roasting company. And I'm give it a go. Yeah. Who knows what could happen? I want to create this album. Give it a go. And there's a part of me that only wanted to align with things that were successful because I felt insecure. But realizing if you have friends that when you have a wild idea, they go give it a go. And they'll give you wisdom if it's you know what I mean. It would be very cool if what was true about Connection Church or about this relationship of churches was there is an openness to give something a go, and failure isn't the scariest thing. Because in a kingdom economy, God's grabbing hold of all sorts of different source material to build something that we didn't even know we were part of building. I'll stop talking there.
That's great. So good, man. I love that. Yeah. That's so good. I'm off in another world now. I'm like, I'd like to hear more from Jason Ballard, please. What was the question again?
When you look
back
at failure, how do you process?
Yeah, so
what can be learned?
imperfectly is the first word that I would use. Imperfectly. From the time I was 30 till about 35, I was an alcoholic, for sure. I was depressed and discouraged about where I was in life, things that hadn't happened. I had these expectations of friends and myself, and that were just completely and totally ridiculous. I think unmet expectations is like one of the worst things in the world. So I was an absolute mess. I had some good friends that helped pull me out of it. Jim McNeish, I met him when I was 35. That like really changed my life. I started to process a little bit better. But yeah, I've done so imperfectly, and probably will continue to do that imperfectly. Like I'm learning as we go here, and having more, having good people around you is like so important for processing. People that'll tell you the truth. It hurts though, so you don't really want to hang out with those people. There's that. And then they'll tire of your crap, and you're avoiding change and all that. But I don't know. I often, my wife often says to me, "You couldn't handle another failure." Like that's the type of person that I am. But I keep on taking risks. I'm like,
you just keep proving her wrong.
Totally.
I got another one in me.
Yeah. So I'm like, my wife is like the most risk averse person, and my dad is the same, like very risk averse. I am an idiot. I don't measure and I cut. My dad measures 3 times and cuts. I always leap before I look. I don't know what's wrong with me. There's a lot of things that are wrong with me. But I live like a really, that's how I lead my business. Like I just go. And there can be real strengths to that. It's obvious huge weaknesses to that. So for a person who's so unpredictable and takes a lot of risks, you'd think that I'd be harder on the outside, and my shell would be, and I'd have some sort of defense mechanism. But I found that doesn't actually help to get calluses in life. It's actually easier to wound, to be the type of person that wounds easy, but then begin the healing process faster. So, admitting that what's going on in your life, and that's what kind of happened with my alcoholism for about 5 years living in New York, was like I wasn't admitting that I was hurting. And when I finally just, my friend was like, "You're hurting." I'm like, "Yeah, I am hurting." And I broke. Like Jim's like, "Yeah, you're in pain." Yeah, I am in pain. You're disappointed. I'm disappointed. So just like being honest about what has happened and like recognizing it, and then being able to, that has kind of helped, I think, with me being able to cope with the realities of failure, and then like not blaming other people too, and just like accepting responsibility, which is like a really easy thing to say and really difficult thing to do. So those are some things. I don't know. And I'm sad that I wasn't able to really help you at all there.
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned, or at least a practice I live by, I don't know if I'd subscribe it to you, or you can take it if you want, is just trying to become a better meaning maker of my life. The end. That's all I got. Or how to make meaning out of seasons of my life. And I think that maybe it resists one single monologue or one single narrative. I'll give you an example. For the first 15 years of ministry, by my own standards, I was a total failure. I mean, nobody would have me preach. I was scraping pennies together. I was 30 years old, making $29,000 a year. People around me were doing better. Low self-esteem. And then I decided to start a church, and that was a complete flop. And I did that for 6.5 years. And I remember just the pain of that. Yeah. I'll never forget one Wednesday night. I don't know, that's probably why the church flopped. We were having service on Wednesday night.
Like just Wednesday, or was that the midweek
No,
program?
that was the midweek. But
Okay.
you start off good, you have momentum, and I'm sitting in my office. We're renting a church building. I'm sitting in my office, and I have this sermon. I'm ready to preach, and I come out to preach, and there's two people in the audience: my mom and my dad. You talk about horrifying. I mean, it broke my heart, and they were there, and it's like in that moment, I'm driving home thinking, this is not what I had in mind in Bible school. But I was a bitter me at that moment because of the way I was trying to make sense of this. And I was blaming myself, blaming this, blaming that, and I'm making sense of it in a different way. Fast forward 8 years, I'm sitting in a pretty good position with a really great role. It's a lot of responsibility. And my parents, who were well, are no longer well. They're sick. 2 sick parents, 2 alien parents, one of which I almost had to bury last year. Making sense of that differently than I do now. Thinking to myself, I had it good then, because I could see my parents anytime I wanted to see them. I could hug mom and dad anytime I wanted to hug them. So I think we have to be mindful in the season that we're in, how we measure that season. What success is and how we're doing. And so just be a mindful meaning maker. That's a book title, by the way. Mindful meaning makers. Touch a neighbor and say, I'm mindful. I'm joking.
It's beautiful, man. I, having known each of you for varying lengths of time, I know each of you to be really productive. I remember last year listening to Chris talk with someone. He was talking about getting near the end of his PhD and then looking for new challenges. And they offered a suggestion to him. They said, maybe one day you could write a book. And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I've authored 9, but yeah, maybe another one. And he was so gracious about it, but he's like, I can't not say, because they're going to stumble across it. But you guys have all found, seemingly from the outside looking in, rhythms that have helped you be productive. Now, here's the risk. You can't copy any of these, but you can learn from some of the principles. You can't copy there is no shortcut where you say, I'm going to do your thing. What's your schedule? How do you keep your budget? All those things. But we can learn from principles. So could you speak to a few of the principled things? Instead of, I don't want it to always go this way and end with you, Chris. I'm going to ask you to go first, which I know you hate because you like it's a little more time to think, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What are some of the rhythms you've learned to increase your productivity? Right. And then hear from the others as well.
I think Justin is such a great host. I mean, isn't this guy great? These questions are like, his intuitiveness to ask these questions.
Chris is buying time so he can process
thinking. What am I going to say?
What would Dostoevsky say right now? It's like, so there's this onion.
He's buying me time. He's on my team, though. Well, it's not a very deep answer, but I had a grandfather who was very hardworking. He served in World War II. He'd come home every single day from work. He would eat his bologna sandwich and his potato chips, and he'd go in the garage and he'd work hard. So he really instilled in me a very hard work ethic. My dad was the same way. So I'm a believer in hard work and putting your hands to work. Maybe I would be the guy that would say work harder, not smarter. But I think when you find something that you love to do, and when you find something that your heart, I was just talking to a student at SEU a couple of days ago. He was asking me about what he should do. And I just said, look, it takes time to find out what your heart is into, but when you begin to serve that, hard work doesn't feel so hard. And so when I started doing my PhD, it was a topic and a subject that I loved enough. And I loved the me who was doing that. I didn't know where it would take me, but there was one time we were working on, I'll never forget this, and I'll pass it to Jason or whoever. We were working on this paper in my graduate studies at Moody Theological Seminary, where I went, and I'd go study at the library every day. And I was putting my heart and soul into this paper. I mean, took 64 pages, I think it came out to be, and it was all kinds of sources and just busting my head over it. But there's times in the midst of this hard work where I would just feel the presence of God come upon me. And I'd have to stop, and I'd have tears in my eyes. I'm like, wait, this isn't a Hillsong song. This isn't Mad City. I'm crying. I got tears in my eyes. Oh, thank you. You're so good, Lord. Lord, your goodness is so great. You're wonderful. My friend Ron sat next to me, and we were working together, and he looked over at me. He said, do you find this worshipful? I said, I do. I think when we put hard work towards the thing that God has placed in our heart, it becomes worshipful. And it becomes something that's easy to remain committed to. So, and it produces a rhythm in our life.
So good, man.
I have ADHD, and I wasn't diagnosed till I was an adult. And it's been so cathartic to revisit my childhood, because I was productive at distracting the class. I was productive at coming up with lots of ideas, but I did horrible in school. I didn't get things submitted until my friend Andrew wanted to get scholarships. And I came from a family without very much money. And Andrew and Jared were willing to go to Tim Hortons. And I could afford bagel with cream cheese. I put cucumber on it and call it a sandwich. And I almost got caught up in the healthy kind of competition and this doing it with friends. And I found out for the first time that I could do good in school. And it wasn't until like grade 11 and 12. And so what I learned is that I need to surround myself with people. And the best, like one of my most important spiritual disciplines, I think a lot about my spiritual practices. I'm horrible at spiritual practices. Like I'm bad at keeping the same Bible reading plan, same prayer plan, but I found that if I can get certain ones in place, other ones cascade down. Right. And the primary one for me is the friendships I keep, and trying to find people that want to co-create, want to go deep in the things of God. The most holy I ever am is when I'm surrounded by people who are like courageous in confessing sin and courageous in being honest. And so it's the biggest thing for me in terms of, productivity. And I appreciate how you framed it, like productivity, and, a lot of people can see that in different ways. But it's been the friends I keep. One interesting thing that's been interesting with my 30s that's different from my 20s, my creativity, which is deeply connected to my productivity, is affected a lot now when I'm tired. So if I don't Sabbath, if I don't have healthy rhythms daily of quiet with the Lord and things, I can see my creative tank wither. Yeah. And I can keep producing, but it's not potent. Nothing is potent. But that wasn't true in my 20s. Like in my 20s, and I'm generalizing 20s, 30s, like not hard, but like, and again, this is me, not anyone else. But I think there's something about the conversation around rest happening that I think is deeply important. But the way that we rest, the way that what like Sabbath looks like, whatever the rhythm is, we have to like have some sense of grit of what stage of life we are in. Like in my 20s, I had enough energy. I worked at U-Haul. I was a full-time student, and I was staying up to drive to pursue Rach. You couldn't stop me. I was working with you at the church. You couldn't stop me. And there was this biological thing happening inside of me to build a life. Yeah. And Rolheiser talks about you build a life and then you give away your life. And what I've realized in my life is like I don't have this drive in me like I once did to create a life for myself, which was coming from all these different forces. And so I don't resent kind of the 20s that drove me. And I'm so glad I didn't obsess over work-life balance in my 20s. And now it's a really deep thing I think I have to organize my life around. Yeah. How do I create rhythms of disengagement so that I can have productive engagement? I don't have that figured out. This is not prescriptive. I just think it's helpful as we have these conversations to acknowledge season, responsibility, and even what's happening biologically, sociologically, whatever, inside of us and around us. Yeah. And so I feel like I wonder in my 40s and my 50s if I'll have to rewire or relearn what it feels like in my body and self in the world to be productive. Because how it feels in my 30s is so different than my 20s.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah, cool. That's really good. I'm going to talk about my drivers, and then I'm going to talk about the particulars. The drivers, I guess we'd never really know what the drivers are in totality. But let's say that there's two major slices of the pie for me would probably be fear and love. I remember John Piper saying something to the tune of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Like it's where you start. but like you don't want to necessarily live in fear. You want to live in love, because and like perfect love casts out fear.
Right.
And so that's why we want to be emotional with God, because you want to live out of your loves. But like love will fail you, and then when your love fails you, your fear will keep you. You know, and so there's like this duality where it's like I'm afraid to be broke.
Yeah.
That's a good fear. I'm afraid to not make my mortgage payment, and so that's a huge driver. And like the more, you take on all this responsibility. Well, that's good. So there's definitely fear. I want to be great. I am ambitious. Jesus appeals to people's desire to be great. He just says, don't do it that way, do it this way. But, like ambition is kind of a good thing. And so for sure. And then love, like Chris said, I have these loves that things that make me come alive. And so I have fear and love and probably some other horrible things driving. But then in particular, I have found that what works for me is being a project-based person. I don't have, I've realized the time of day that I'm really good at. I think Jordan Peterson says that you have basically 3 hours a day to be good at something, and the rest is just garbage. So if you're writing a book, your first 3 hours is going to be awesome. If you write any longer than that, it'll be more time editing the garbage that you wrote. So better just to like identify, where you're a genius. And so for me, that's the morning. When I wake up, I'm smart. As the day goes on, the fruit of the Spirit falls off my tree, and I'm a horrible person. So I do stuff in the morning that matters, right? And then I do stuff in the afternoon that doesn't matter. Like I'll go to the gym in the afternoon because I don't have to think, and I'll just get in my body, and that kind of repairs me from my thinking, So I have these rhythms in my day, and know thyself, and so I'm trying to know what works for me. That's what works for me. I'm project based, so I have a deadline. Deadlines are like I'm really good at deadlines. So okay, I have a deadline for this book. I have a deadline for this project. I have a deadline for this thing that we're working on, and so I will give my undivided attention to that thing, and then okay, what's next? Because I'm a bit creative and I have multiple interests, I'm a multi-potentialite. I have, being project-based is really good for me because it allows change of scenery every week or every couple weeks, which feeds me and makes me feel alive. So those are kind of, and then I think it was Mark Twain that said something about when you wake up in the morning, eat the frog, and do the difficult thing first. And so I try to do like whatever the difficult thing is, the thing that that I would typically avoid, I do that first, which is typically writing, because I hate sitting down, because I probably have a touch of the ADD as well. Like for example, I was talking about spiritual disciplines. I can't sit and pray. I have to walk and pray. Yeah. When I began to walk and pray, all of a sudden I became a very spiritual person. But I didn't know you were allowed to walk and pray. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, well, I'm cheating God here because really I'm doing this for the exercise. Like, actually, no, like I want to be a spiritual person, but I'm trying, I'm using Saul's armor to try to be, I'm not that guy. I'm not my dad. My dad could like speak in tongues on his knees for hours. That's not me. It'll never be me. But I can walk and pray. So anyways, it's just like finding what works for you, man. Like, and then just, hijacking your, exploiting your strengths. And it's not, and I think the insecure part is that it doesn't look like your heroes. So that's why we don't do it at first. Really good. Because like I'm comparing myself to my dad, and I'm not him. I'm Nathan. But there could be iterations of the gold in him, but it's not going to look the same. So that's that.
Love that. Love that. Love you talking about heroes. I think, in ministry as in any walk of life, there are people that you look to, that you're trying to learn from. Some are close, some are far. You get like close mentorship. You also get at a distance. You don't know who I am, but I'm learning from you. Wonder, how do you guys balance learning from others with a sense of the potential for comparison, maybe even jealousy, maybe even some covetousness, where you're like, oh man, if I could only have what they have. Is that something you guys have struggled with? If so, how do you fight that?
Yes, of course. I'm jealous of everybody's success. I think for sure. I'm not jealous of Chris's life for numerous reasons. But let me hedge that in. Like Chris woke up this morning at 6 and read all morning. I'm unwilling to do that. But I want his academic prowess. And so I'm unwilling to pay the price of the 4 a.m. club that has abs. You know what I mean? So when you understand process and that everybody gets to a certain place because of their process, there's no such thing as cheating process. And so when you realize that, and it dawns upon you, then your jealousy goes pretty quickly. Because you realize the cost that they've paid, and you go, oh yeah, I'm not willing to do that. So enjoy your life. I celebrate you. I celebrate your 6 a.m. Tea time or whatever it is. But then obviously there's people that you emulate. For one reason or another, because they are, they're a trailblazer, or they have the life that you desire, and so. Jim McNeish says that the word passion is Latin for suffering, and whatever you're passionate about, you will suffer for, right? And so if you're wondering, what is my passions? Well, what are you willing to suffer for? That's your passions. So once you identify what you're willing to suffer for, then your passions are then easy to identify, and then I will do anything for this. There's your thing. Chase it. And so when I identify guys that are passionate about the same things that I'm passionate about, then I begin to ask a lot of questions, and that can help me, that can inform things. But somebody who's just successful for the sake of success, that's, once again, we're not, because there's no cross-pollination. But I'd be interested in their processes anyways. I love process. I'm interested in people's processes. I'm fascinated by them because process is everything. It's how you get to something. And so anyways, I digress.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad. That's great. I think, it's easy to become moved with envy towards people for things that you're deficient in. For instance, I say it like this: I draw my files really slow. So I have to think about something, and then I'm like, oh gosh, I got it. I'm the guy that after the argument thinks about it later on, like I should have said that. That's me. Takes some time.
The French call that l'esprit d'escalier, the wit of the staircase.
What did he say?
And he had that so quick. He knew what the French call it.
Yeah.
You're going up to bed, and you remember that I should have said that.
Should have said that. That's me, and it takes some time. Sometimes it'd be people's names that my own name. What's my name again? Let me think. When I got stopped by the security officer coming into Canada, he's like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "What am I doing here? I'm here to see my friend Pepe. What is he here for? I don't know. It's just me." I'm getting all nervous now. Are you staying at his house? Yes, I'm staying at his house. I'm not staying at his house, so that's me. I'm a klutz. But let me wax spiritual for a second. Because Nathan won't be spiritual when he's preaching. He's not a spiritual guy at all. Just teasing. I'll wax spiritual. I've noticed, I'm not saying this is a principle and an axiom for life, but I've noticed that prayer, when I don't pray and I'm not in prayer and in the presence of the Lord, things that I should be admiring about people, I become envious towards. And you can't learn from somebody if you're envious towards them. But you can learn from them when you admire those things about them. And then if you admire those things about them, then what's theirs, they'll happily pass them on to you if they can. And so I think that that's part of our spirituality. And there's something about prayer that turns envy into admiration. And you can receive from that person. And I think that really is being in the presence of the triune God. That when you're before the triune God, in your private prayer time, or at the Lord's table, or in the body, and you have that real presence of Jesus, the real presence of Jesus experientially in our lives impresses us and makes it harder for people to impress you. And you don't become as envious towards them. You admire them because you see the Creator in their life. They can pass that to you. So all that to say, prayer makes a heck of a difference. Yeah.
I have like 100 thoughts on things I shouldn't even have thoughts about. So I'm going to not answer this one, even though I have thoughts, because I think that you're such a good question asker that I'm curious what other questions are available.
Well, here comes another one. This one a little more specific. All of you have spoken to the amount of time that you've been in ministry, 15 years in varying degrees, the entirety of your adult lives. There would have been a time, if we were to go backwards, where we could sit on a panel like this, and each of you would share something that you deeply believe, that today you no longer deeply believe. Could you share what that would be? Like, what's something you used to believe that you're like, that's not true, and here's why.
Loch Ness Monster.
I used to really believe that believing was enough to transform somebody. I mean it. Like, I preached and beat myself up. Like, I just needed, like, I used to think about sexual purity, like, just be pure. This is right, this is wrong. Try harder. And I just have come to believe, no, I don't believe that it's as simple as I thought it was. And I know it's a lot more complex. I think we need truth and ethics, or else you don't understand how to align your actions, your decisions, what you do have control of. But I think the way I preach has changed so much because I realize at the end of the day, we're not rational people. We think, but we are complex result of our experiences, our loves, and our beliefs. And those things are all play together. And so one thing I love about Pentecostalism is that it draws from truth. This is what's right or wrong is. But it speaks to affections. Like, it gets riled up. And your affections actually, like, I need to actually want to live for God. Like, actually, and the Spirit of God testifies with our spirit. Like, it draws our affections in. And then Scripture invites us to practices, like pattern your life in such a way that the affections and the truth can actually become muscle memory to some degree. And I think that you can have schools of thoughts like the Bible, truth. It's like we're just short on truth. The spiritual formation movement is like we're just short on practices. The charismatic, we're just short on encounter. And I just don't think you have to pick one. And I don't know the alchemy of it all. And maybe there's a fourth connection point. But I find myself preaching. And when I say preaching, I'm just using that as an avatar for how I perceive the world. But like, it comes out in my preaching to stir affections, to proclaim truth, to partner with the work of the Spirit, to invite people in to change their imagination, their mental models, their stories that they believe, and even to begin to inhabit practices that can actually change the affections over time and take what's true about God and how he invites us to live in the world into our even muscle memory. Yep. And so I just think that it's harder to change than I thought, but more possible too.
Yeah, well, that's good, Jason. That's so good, man. That's so good.
Go on, Chris.
Oh, you, man. They're waiting to hear from the great one.
Man, I think the most significant, like, I remember reading a book and going, oh my God, like a moment. I'm sure that there have been and continue to be like there's no perfect theology. There's better theologies. You know, it's like I once heard somebody commenting about the doctrine of the Trinity, and it's like, you know, there's better ways of saying things, and so I'm like, I'm constantly trying to have better ways of articulating things, you know, doctrinally, etc. But I can remember a time, you know, I was raised in a charismatic church in Canada, from Ontario, and I was convinced that like we were the only Christians, and then even going to Bible college, and like I was convinced that my Bible college was the only Bible college that knew what they were talking about, and everybody else was an idiot. And but one thing I knew for certain was that Catholics are definitely not Christians. And that was like without a doubt. I mean, this is probably because my parents were both raised Catholic. They became like godless hippies. Then they met Jesus during like the Jesus Revolution, Jesus People thing in the early 70s. And so they had this like bitterness that they translated and passed down to their kids about the Catholic Church. And so, you know, they're kind of, and their criticisms of the Catholic Church were like from people who necessarily didn't really know Catholic dogma all that well. And I think something that has shifted for me incredibly, like, so for example, I would describe our movement, and even I'd say the Pentecostal movement, as like the church has been lost since Constantine, and since the Azusa Street, and we've got tongues back. Yeah. And now the Book of Acts, really we're building the Book of Acts church now, right? And all that crap in between about 350 AD to 1906 is just apostasy. And the church has just been lost, and et cetera. And I remember reading, outlawed material written by one Gilbert Keith Chesterton that was smuggled into our dorm room. And it was my senior year in Bible college. And I'm reading The Resurrection of Rome. It's even hard to get a copy. And I read it from cover to cover, I think, in 2 days. And I was just like, oh my God. And so then I began to read Hilaire Belloc. I began to read Hilaire Belloc on the English Reformation. And I'm like, I wasn't told this, and reading Belloc on the rest of the Reformation. I mean, like, there's serious political things that are happening during the Protestant Reformation. Now, I'm not a Catholic. I, for all intents and purposes, I'm an unreliable Pentecostal, as Chris says.
Notice who's quoting who on this day.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, honor to where honor's due, Chris. Dr. Chris. Thank you. Yeah. He did his PhD in theodicy in the book of Revelation. I'm preaching on grace. Turn to the book of Revelation. Tonight I'm going to be preaching on the gift of the Holy Spirit. Turn to the book of Revelation. Anyways.
I'm going to officiate this wedding. Turn to the book of Revelation.
Correct. Exactly. Oh, your wife left you? Turn to Revelation 21. So that's the type of counseling that you need to get into, man. That changes.
Christian Bingo profile, Revelation 21.
Totally. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, I start reading this stuff and I'm like, this is insane. So once again, I'm not swimming across the Tiber. I'm not taking my clothes off on the other side of the Tiber either. I'm not even like looking at the Tiber. I'm just saying that the Catholic Church did an incredible job of creating the greatest civilization known to mankind, for 1600 centuries, and that's not debatable. It's completely not debatable. They created the greatest art. I think in many ways, humanity peaked during the Catholic period. All that to say, that is a huge shift for somebody who is a Pentecostal. That is a huge shift for somebody. Now you start to read Ronald Knox and whoever else, Christopher Dawson, and you start to get a little sacramental, and you start to, your mind begins to open up to people that you thought were heretics, and now it begins to bleed into your doctrines, and it begins to round them out, and no longer are you somebody who thinks that you have the corner on truth. Now you become ecumenical, and you're seeing value in other people that you even disagree with. You're listening to them, and you're going, man, I can't push back on that. That's really, so the gift that God gave me was being wrong. So wrong, and hopefully I continue to be wrong so that I can be right every now and then, and that's kind of been my journey, but that big one really shifted everything for me.
That's great. That's great answers here. Very thorough. We'll have to have another question of this because this is going to go dark real quick. I'm a dark soul. I did my thesis on suffering in theodicy from the book of Revelation, of all the places. One of the things that I used to think, maybe in my naivety, is that the way I think about the future, that life kind of it has a happy ending, the credits come up and everything is well, or something went wrong. But individually, personally, I grew up Word of Faith, so that's how things were supposed to happen. In 2007, when I was doing hospital visitations, it seemed like everybody I was laying hands on would die. It seems like everybody else anointed with oil would die. They'd send me to the hospital.
Aren't you glad he didn't have an altar call last night? It's just stay in your seat. We'll pray from afar.
And, there's always a gnawing inside of me that's it can't be this way, because this isn't a really happy ending. I mean, it was always a sad story behind it. And then, you have those stories where things end well and they have everybody around them. But I realized, maybe this is my experience talking, yours might be different. But out of my experience, it seems like we're surrounded by a bunch of unhappy endings, the way life happens. I actually proposed that title to a publisher, and that book would never sell. That's the worst idea ever. Who's going to buy that and read that on the beach with my... Really? Yeah. Unhappy endings. And it's just in my autobiography. No. But what do you do with that? What do you do with that? I think the only place that we can turn is prioritize what the Apostle Paul prioritized in his faith. And it's not how this life ends, but it's how the new life begins with the resurrection of our Lord. And that when we come to the Lord's table and we take the Eucharist and we gather together, we're doing this in remembrance of him who shed his blood, like Jason was preaching on today, because we lived in a world of chaos, so that he could redeem us out of the chaos, and in dying we might live. And so when we focus as a culture, a Western culture, on holding on to the now with the wellness programs that we have, and the boomers that don't want to get older, and the millennials that think they're young will stay young, and the Gen Zs and all that, we lose the eternal perspective on the resurrection. And so I think what that's done is shifted me to being more resurrected minded, that our life and our victory is not in how it ends here, but how it begins there. That's really shaped my paradigm and has removed really the fear of death. And
What's fascinating, you were talking about communion, and it's always been remembrance, right? Which it is. But in Paul's 1 Corinthians 11, it's you do this until he comes again. That there's always the looking back, what he's done, a present encounter in some mysterious, strange way. We'll let the Catholic talk about how that works. And just kidding. I regret that. I don't like that. Because now people wonder, like, what do I think about Catholics? I love Catholics. I believe they're Christians as well. Now I digress. But it's also a looking forward. And for so long, I didn't practice communion with a look forward looking as well. That's like the looking back, the present encounter, and then holding on till he comes again. Yeah. And I think it was actually doing prayer ministry at our church and seeing the same people. See, I did itinerant ministry for a long time. And you pray for people, you leave, and you assume they probably got zapped better. Yeah. But when you're a pastor or in a hospital, you see the same thing again, and you realize that what orients the Christian faith is like this future hope in breaking the present. Yes. Because otherwise, when you pray for healing, then it doesn't work in the way we want it to. Is there still hope? And if the resurrection isn't true, then there's not. There's not. Yep. I just appreciate you sharing that. It's just been recent for me, just looking at that in the text there.
Yeah, that's bang on. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's brilliant. Yes, I'd agree. I mean, we can't allow our cultural location to shape we're supposed to prioritize in the text. And that is, Christ died, the seed was crushed so that it might spring up. And that's how we look at death. Yeah. That's how we look at what seems to be the ending. And so that's very, I think when we do that in communion, we have that eschatological anticipation, as we say. And not having, here's a big theological word, an over-realized eschatology, knowing that there are some things that still Christ purchased for us and we're awaiting to receive.
It's beautiful. Okay, well, I'm getting the sign that we're coming close on time. I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to take one of the possible answers off the table, okay?
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a question. It's a pretty direct question, and I'm going to take self-deprecation off the table. It's funny, but I'm just going to take it off the table right now. I heard it said that humility is to measure yourself accurately. So both good and bad. It's having an accurate measure of your weaknesses and your strengths. What have each of you come to discover is one of your unique gifts to the body of Christ? Like a spiritual gift, a way that God is truly using you, and in humility, self-deprecation off the table, that you have a confidence. I know God uses me this way.
Good, man. Collecting people that I'm good at collecting people.
That's true.
I'm a people collector. Like Theo's Hugh is like dinner for schmucks. And I find these randoms who are geniuses, but they're losers. And I invite you to come and dine and watch them just be absolutely brilliant and quirky. And I'm good at that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. I'm a collector.
It's good. I like that.
I think I'm good at seeing what other people are good at and trying to speak it to them in a way that helps them see and believe that that's true. And I learned it from my mentor, Daryl Johnson. And I think I was going to say it earlier about how to deal with the comparison and ego thing. He marvels. Like if he met Nathan or Chris, he'd be like, almost like peering into your brain and just a spectacle, like God made their mind like that. And it's worship for him. Like fundamentally, he kills comparison by admiring, like looking at how Nathan can pull ideas together. I could sit here and compare, but I also am like marveling. And when that marvel turns to worship, and I realize I feel like I'm good at that actually. I feel like I'm good at seeing and meeting someone and be like, because we don't know, we inhabit a space, we think everyone's like us. But when you meet someone who's good at encouraging, you're like, they need to know that that's a superpower that they have. Or when they're good at hospitality, like Leah and Pepe, like you guys know this, I'm sure, but it's a wild gift of hospitality. Every volunteer has made me feel more special than my parents do when I go to their home. And you guys can't help but be that. And it's just so fun. I love that you can observe that. And then it's so powerful. It's almost like prophecy in that it can be as powerful, but it's different. You speak back what's true. It's not flattery. And then somehow the Spirit can grab it. And that's maybe that's not my best at, but it's one of my favorite things that I feel like is like watching how people are wired and then naming it back to them almost in a prophetic way.
Let me just push back on one thing you said there. You said it's almost like prophecy. I think by definition of 1 Corinthians 14, 1-5, it exactly is prophecy. Stir up. Yeah, exactly. Stir up, cheer up, build up. And you don't have to do that. You can do that with
And when it's not
but
flattery, it's so refreshing. Because flattery is just so, it just leaves you feeling worse off when you realize. Yeah.
It's actually the toughest question you've asked.
Oh my God, Chris. Just say what you're good at.
I don't know.
You're a genius. Come on. You're good at like 18,000 different things.
None of which are good on a date, by the way.
Clearly not.
Did you hear like a deep awe from over there? There was like laughter, and then there's like an awe from deep.
I'm good at manipulating sympathies. I think maybe I might be good at, I would be good at, hopefully.
Oh.
This is painful. It is painful. Hopefully inspiring people to, in a world full of the culture wars, where people are visceral and become radicalized from scrolling, and just one of the most interesting things I ever read was an article about the engineer from Twitter who invented the retweet button, and hated that he did that, because you'd see something that was a half-truth or a third of a truth, and it would create a visceral response, and you tweet it out, and misinformation started spreading everywhere because it appealed to people's carnal sensibilities. And one of the things I do believe I'm good at is getting people around me to at least slow down for a second and measure what you're saying and how you're thinking, so that you don't become a product, or I should say a pawn in somebody else's chess game. That you can maintain your original thinking in a way that's faithful epistemologically, in a way that you've faithfully done your research. Because I think today, what's at an all-time premium is not information, because we have a lot of it. That doesn't make you impressive. Right. Information is not formation. Formation is to be valued over information. And if I can get a hold of a student and say, hey, let's not practice what you know. Let's practice how you're known and how you're being formed. I think God can make something of that, and that's what I like to do, and I'm the best at it.
So convincing. Let me second that. So Chris in my life has been somebody that goes, show me how you got there. You know what I mean? Like, so if I say something, he'll be like, okay, well, your method's bad, and here's why. You know what I mean? I'll be like, so he's the method man. I call him the method man. And he pays real attention to that. He's so freaking good at it. Makes me smart.
Amazing. Hey, can we just take a moment and thank these guys? What an honor to be around people who provoke thought and are willing to share it. I remember once talking to a young man who was studying to be a doctor, and he said the strangest thing is we get together and study, but we know that the number of places in med school are limited, so none of us share the best info. We pretend we're helping each other, but we're actually just trying to steal from each other. And I love a community like this where we're literally saying, hey, just learn from mistakes and learn from failures, and here's the best info we've got. Pepe, you're awesome. Let's turn it back to Pastor Pepe.
Well, that's all that we have for you today. If you like the message that you just heard, don't forget to like it, let us know your comments below, and share it with as many people as possible. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and our website. And if you're in Victoria, BC, Canada, we would love to see you this upcoming Sunday. God bless you, and see you soon.